I'm Sherry Wolf here with Susanna Deli, Lamis Deek, and Michael Letwin. We want to talk about the National Lawyers Guild sponsored tour of or delegation to Egypt recently, and just what was the purpose of this delegation to Egypt?
The purpose of the delegation was to bring lawyers, activists, and scholars who already have been involved in work surrounding the Middle East and with already sort of an analysis that was supporting the goals of the revolution, to go to Egypt and meet with a broad range of activists in civil society, through grassroots organizations, youth organizations, in a wide academics, in a wide spectrum of politics, to learn, I think, more intentionally about the revolutionary process taking place, what it means for the future of the region, or what it means for us trying to also build our own movement here in the United States, and also, and more importantly, to seek out information, evidence, really sort of do an investigation of how the United States government has been complicit in, firstly, human rights violations that have occurred under SCAF's leadership, also under the Mubarak regime. To see the ways that the Egyptian military has been armed by U.S. corporations and other private corporations, so that they can continue this sort of systematic terror campaign against protesters, and also look at sort of the policies, the political policies. Where the United States kind of has been complicit in sort of backdoor sort of maneuvering of the various powers there, and look at also the economic policies that are part of this relationship between the Egyptian military, the U.S. government, the Egyptian elite, and also the global elite, and how those policies have devastated many aspects of Egyptian society, very much in the way that they have devastated other parts of the world. But what we see in Egypt is probably one of the most important examples of people rising up against these economic and social and political injustices. And so it was very important for us to both study it while simultaneously solidifying relationships that we've had for a long time, to understand what's going on the ground, to get a better understanding about how we can then in the United States not just work in solidarity with them, but it's sort of our understanding that what happens in Egypt is important to what happens in the United States, and what happens in the United States is vital to what's happening in the region. Egypt having always been strategic importance to the United States and the United States' interests in the region. And many of us who've been following the politics of the region for a long time, when the Egyptian uprising began, we were looking at it differently than let's say your average Occupy organizer was looking at it. We understood really what it meant to overcome decades of fear. Right. We understand what it really meant. People make these comparisons to the destruction of the Berlin Wall, and really those comparisons are kind of false, because whereas the Berlin Wall falling was going in many respects in the direction of a world order, the Egyptians, when they were in the streets, knew that not only were they fighting for their own sort of national liberation in their country, they knew that they were also marching against a world order, because they knew that the United States was very much a part of why they've been suffering for these decades. And that's connected to U.S. interests in the region, which includes Israel's security, and includes sort of this relationship that the U.S. has with Saudi Arabia and their other allies in the region.
Lamis, can you give us an idea of who were you meeting with and what were some of the findings? And you guys should.
Well, it was a very diverse kind of meeting, and it included everything from activists to legal workers, legal organizations, people who did work around political prisoner issues, torture, various representatives of the different sectors in Egyptian political life, from the Islamists to the leftists to the socialists to so organizers, activists, attorneys, various institutions, think tanks of sorts. So it was a very diverse meeting, labor unions, labor leaders. So it was a diverse meeting, and some of us focused on certain areas. There was so much that Suzanne and Mesa had organized for us, and each of it, not each of us, but each handful of us kind of took whatever our focus area was and really honed in on that. And part of why I was particularly interested and insistent on going is to expose the role of the U.S. government, or learn about and expose the role of the U.S. government in repressing Palestinian, in repressing Egyptian organizers and activists, not just during the revolution, but all of the coordination and the direct and indirect support, encouragement, however you have it, of the Egyptian regime against the people of Egypt. And, I've always said that you can judge the condition, I guess, by, I actually learned that somebody else, far smarter and more prolific than I had been saying this, but you can judge the condition of a society by its treatment of its political prisoners. And it's usually the political prisoners who have been at the forefront of whatever movement for democracy, change, justice, liberation. And like Suzanne said, I mean, this is clearly, I've also said, and I'll continue to say, that what we're seeing happen in the Arab world, the counter-revolutionary forces, wherever they are in the Arab world, what the people are doing are fighting against, I mean, it's a world war playing out in Egypt, in Syria, even in Palestine, right, absolutely. And so that's what the Arab people are fighting back against, that's what they're rising up against. And of particular concern to me, as an attorney very much concerned with political prisoners, was this issue, the treatment, the conditions, and the U.S. role during the transitional period, during the revolution, and before the revolution. And what we saw across the board, and what we had learned, was that the U.S. government took a very direct role in encouraging the clampdown and the repression and the imprisonment of various sectors of Egyptian society and Egyptian movements, from the labor unions to the students to the women and whatnot. And how is it relevant to us? Certainly, it's the foundation of any true, global social justice movement. But with regards to Americans, it's critical that people understand that although our government paid a lot of lip service to the Egyptian revolution, what was happening was that they continued to directly and indirectly direct SCAF in their continued repression during the transitional phase, and even now, of the Egyptian people. And that's relevant because as Americans, in order to be able to democratically participate in our political processes, we need access to this information. So our core call, and the most critical component that we came out with, is our demand for transparency and full disclosure of the relationships, the conditions, all of the coordination, all of the directives that were given from the American government to the Egyptian military regime. So it's important that people know this, and know that, yeah, great, even if you didn't like Arabs before you were inspired by the revolution, what's happening is a detriment to both us in the US and Arabs throughout the Arab world, of course. In Palestine, this is directly relevant, and the Egyptian people.
And we're all suffering the same repression. I mean, to one degree or another. It's not, in Egypt and Palestine, people are suffering much greater repression, obviously, than we are in this country, political repression. Yet, the same tear gas, the same force, to one degree or another, is being used against people all across the world by the same forces, the same world order. And so when somebody gets shot with a tear gas canister in Oakland, it's the same tear gas that people have been shot with in Palestine or in Egypt. And so we want to stop the United States government from arming and financing the generals in Egypt, because they're the same enemies that we have here at home.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but not to, one interesting thing now that we see the election of Morsi, we're seeing the same Islamophobic, anti-Muslim rhetoric that's used against Muslims in America and in Europe being used, and internalized by people abroad, and being used publicly, in the West, against the new president of Egypt, and this really talks to how it's this global movement to repress the masses generally and deprive them of their own resources, and a global movement rising up against that, really. So you've got the world war, but then you've also got the war of the 1% versus the 99%, really.
Can you guys just give us the website and any sort of next steps? I know there's a meeting in New York for July 10th. Please give us the information for that.
There's going to be a meeting on July 10th in New York. For those of you who are from New York, 33 West 14th Street at 7 p.m. on July 10th. That's going to be a first in a series of report backs where we're going to combine the information that we have with discussions by activists in the United States already working on the ground. So it will be report back and then also strategy sessions to talk about how to continue to build a global solidarity movement really around what's taking place in Egypt. And as far as websites, I think if you go to the NLG national website, nlg.org, you can find a link to the first statement that our delegation has put out. Well, we are going to be working on a comprehensive report, which hopefully will come out in about 2 months.
Thank you very much.